Good afternoon, everyone. This is Roneen Davis at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. We're going to go ahead and get started with the webinar, Engaging Families in Reentry and Demonstrating Improved Outcomes for Family Members of Returning Fathers. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And we're excited to have this webinar. The Council of State Governments Justice Center is working to expand our focus on family engagement work in reentry. And this is one of the first webinars of the year where we're addressing this particular topic. So the Council of State Governments Justice Center is a national nonprofit organization that serves policymakers at the local, state, and federal levels from all branches of government. Staff provides practical, nonpartisan advice and evidence-based, consensus-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. The National Reentry Resource Center is run by the Council of State Governments Justice Center. It's supported by the Bureau of Justice Assistance, and NRRC staff have worked with nearly 600 Second Chance Act grantees, including 40 state corrections agencies. We are constantly adding new content and resources to our website, and we send out a monthly newsletter that provides information about the latest research, funding opportunities, distance learning events, and other news about reentry. We encourage everyone who hasn't done so already to sign up for the newsletter, and you can visit the link on your screen after today's webinar. A few logistics notes about the webinar. You'll see at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen there, or of the WebEx part of the screen, there is a question and answer box where throughout the presentation, feel free to submit any questions you have for our presenters. We have 3 presenters today. After each presentation, we'll take a little bit of time for questions that you have for that particular presenter, and then at the end of the webinar, we'll open it up again for additional questions for everyone. Our 3 presenters today are Dr. Shanique Thomas from the Council of State Governments Justice Center, Eric Passeri, the Vice President of Program Support at National Fatherhood Initiative, and Dr. Jay Fagan, the co-director of the Fatherhood Research and Practice Network and a professor at Temple University. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Dr. Thomas.
Thank you, Roneen, for facilitating this webinar on such an important topic. First, I will introduce some data that many of you are probably familiar with. It is estimated that more than 77 million Americans have a criminal record. As of year-end 2013, more than 6 million people were under some form of correctional supervision in the United States. This includes prison, jail, and community supervision. Specifically, 1.5 million people were incarcerated in federal and state facilities. We also know that most of the people incarcerated in these prisons and jails are indeed returning home to their communities and families, many under some form of continued supervision. Many parents who are incarcerated do indeed maintain contact with their loved ones, especially that of their children. And as a result, incarceration has had a profound impact and extensive reach on families, with great attention being given to the number of children who have a parent who is incarcerated. It's estimated that 1.7 million minor children are affected, with approximately 7.5 million with a parent under correctional supervision. Recent research conducted by Hedwig Lee and colleagues out of the University of Washington find that 1 in 4 women in the United States are connected to a family member who is incarcerated. In particular, 1 in 2.5 adult Black women have at least one family member currently incarcerated. It is important to note these connections because we must acknowledge those who rally together to support individuals returning home and understand that the removal of a family member may, as a result, leave families vulnerable, place a heavy burden on the women tied to them, and that of their social network. So again, many parents who are incarcerated do indeed maintain contact with their loved ones, especially that of their children. Research conducted by the Bureau of Justice Statistics find that 44% of parents in state prison were living with their children at the time of their incarceration. 59% of fathers never had a personal visit with their children since admission to prison. and 79% of parents in state prison had some form of contact with their children. And this includes 70% who have exchanged letters with their children, 53% have had phone calls with their children, and 41% had a personal visit. Although many parents have had contact with their children, there still are many barriers evident, and at times these barriers make the process of maintaining connections arduous and expensive. So there's a growing body of research that concludes, kind of obviously, that families are important for successful reentry. Families play a significant role in assisting their family member build stable lives after incarceration. Research conducted out of the Urban Institute found that families were vital in assisting those reentering with financial resources, securing housing, and providing emotional support prior to release, and continued emotional support after release. We are also learning more about the importance of maintaining contact, especially through visiting. There's a wealth of research coming from the University of South Florida, Florida State University, and many other scholars from Rutgers, Arizona State, Virginia Tech, and other educational and research institutions about the positive benefit of consistent and frequent quality visits between family members throughout the incarceration period. Families are a critical support network. Yet, sometimes families are not necessarily engaged nor involved in the reentry prep efforts, and agencies may find it challenging to facilitate family interactions. But many times the necessary resources, emotional or tangible, lie within the family network. And that may include extended family members, friends, and other community members. Families also undergo their own difficult experiences when a loved one is incarcerated. These may include stress and anxiety associated with separation, economic stress from loss of income or from trying to maintain the needs and contact with the incarcerated family member, stigmatization, along with working to negotiate and navigate the altered family structure and relationships. And also, the familial roles are changed. In particular, children may encounter their own trauma, stigma, and shame, which may manifest in academic and or behavioral forms and look different for young boys versus young girls, and it may also depend on which parent is incarcerated. So the research community, policymakers, legislators, and correctional administration are finally beginning to take notice of this significant enriched resource. Community-based agencies like the ones joining this webinar today are far advanced in their efforts to pull families into programming. But we all know that families need support and guidance too throughout the reentry process. So in addition to the 3 organizations represented on this webinar, the Council of State Governments, National Fatherhood Initiative, and FRPN, many other agencies have developed resources and tools to help facilitate and enhance family engagement. Some of these include the National Resource Center on Children and Families of the Incarcerated at Rutgers University. So this agency has a very useful website that provides a directory of programs along with supporting articles, fact sheets, and curricula. Sesame Street has also designed tools within their Little Children and Big Challenges resources to guide discussions with children about incarceration. The Osborne Association, based in New York City, is a leader in the area of programming for families and children connected to a loved one who is incarcerated. In addition to all of the work that they lead, Osborne has developed a call to action report that assists policymakers, practitioners, advocates, and families to enact positive changes to benefit the lives of New York's children. In their toolkit, the Center for Effective Public Policy and Vera Institute outlines strategies for effectively engaging families in the reentry process. And lastly, the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights recently released a report centered on illuminating the true cost of incarceration on families. Within the Justice Center, we are committed to improving our own technical assistance strategy and activities to integrate and hone in on family engagement and to identify useful and informative performance measures for programs. And this is all in addition to continue to disseminate critical knowledge and resources. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Roneen.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. I just want to point out that one of the reasons that we had this webinar is many of the Second Chance Act Young Fatherhood Mentoring grantees have been calling for more information on how the work that they're doing is impacting the families of the fathers that they serve and how they can measure that work. And there are a lot of who is attending the webinar today, as well as adult mentoring grantees who are engaging with parents who are incarcerated and who they are working with as they transition back to the community. So we're excited to have Eric speak next from the National Fatherhood Initiative, who will talk about some of the programs that NFI has been working on and what they've discovered in this area.
All right, well, thank you, Roneen. I want to thank the Justice Center for the opportunity to be with you all today and for the work you're all doing to enrich fathers and families. It's encouraging to hear about some of the work that you're doing as part of the work with the Justice Center. So National Fatherhood Initiative is a nonprofit organization. We were founded in 1994 to improve the well-being of children by helping men be the best dads that they can be. And we do that through what we call our 3E strategy, which is educate, equip, and engage. In my section, I want to touch on our two key programs that are used in reentry efforts across the country and share what we've learned from the field as a result. So to that end, I'll cover what the programs are and how they fit into the reentry process, along with what we've learned, particularly around the measurement of family outcomes. Inside Out Dad is a pre-release program for incarcerated fathers that includes 12 sessions with another 4 optional re-entry sessions. The program focuses on critical issues he faces related to who he is as a man first, because being a better dad essentially flows out of being a better man. So the program starts with topics such as family history, masculinity, where did he get this idea, is it a healthy view, showing and handling emotions, and men's health. And we do that before moving into things like communicating with mom, children's growth, discipline, and fathering from the inside. It is an evidence-based program based on a study out of Rutgers University where they did use a control and intervention group. Now, 24/7 Dad is our post-release program that is ideal for dads who are out in the community. There are 2 complete 24/7 Dad programs, which we call 24/7 Dad AM and 24/7 Dad PM, and each of those include 12 sessions and can be used independently or together. But similar to the Inside Out Dad program, 24/7 Dad also starts with the man before getting into his role as a father, since everything as a dad kind of flows out of who he is as a man. And it is designed to help him become more nurturing by increasing his empathy. That ability to see through the eyes of other people is crucial in helping him to become more nurturing. And now 24/7 Dad is also evidence-based thanks to a study that we just recently got out of the University of Hawaii. They also used a control and intervention group and even random assignment, which is kind of considered the gold standard in some of the evaluations out there. And the control and intervention group was used to assess its impact on the fathers and even on their families, which was really exciting for us to actually have an evaluation come back that broadened it out not only to the father's growth and development, but also how was that impacting the families. And I'll talk more about that later in the presentation. Now, our programs are usually part of a larger intervention, and I thought that was important enough to put a slide in here for that, so that you can see how it fits into the bigger picture of organizations that use these programs. And this larger intervention can include just pre-release work, just post-release work, or even a combination of both for a full reentry approach. these additional support services on the pre-release side, which you can see at the top of the slide here in the blue, usually focus on education, values, community service, financial literacy, and workforce development, among others. And then on the post-release side, which you can see at the bottom of the slide in the yellow, we usually see additional services around housing, employment, substance abuse, child support, and domestic violence. And now I have the arrows flowing out from Inside Out Dad and 24/7 Dad because family and community connections are the keys to reducing recidivism. And Shanika touched on that in her presentation at the beginning of the webinar. But that's what these two programs address. So for example, a 3-year Indiana Department of Corrections study found that 24/7 Dad and Inside Out Dad, along with some of these other programs, reduced recidivism by up to 30%. The DC-based Center for Law and Social Policy stated that the desire of parents to reunite with their children is often the key motivation for helping them turn their lives around. And when we have story after story at NFI, some of which you can view in the free resource section of our website, which I'll put up there later, but it's just fatherhood.org. And but we hear a lot of different examples where fathers are able to sustain healthy life choices because they now understand the unique and irreplaceable role they play in their children's lives. Now, why would a dad want to address his addiction? Because he has a unique and irreplaceable role in the life of his child. Why would he stay with a less than perfect job or establish stable housing? Well, because he has a unique and irreplaceable role in the life of his children. So this applies to all of the other support services I mentioned on the previous slide as well. So how does Inside Out Dad impact family outcomes? So starting on the pre-release side with Inside Out Dad, from a programmatic perspective, the work with fathers before release is critical to the father's success after release. And it's also much easier to get fathers engaged in groups when they're in the facility. In fact, many of the facilities who run Inside Out Dad have waiting lists for dads to get in. Once the fathers experience how powerful and enjoyable these sessions are, it is a lot more likely that they will be open to joining a similar program after release. The Inside Out Dad evaluation that Rutgers University did provides some great data on the impact fatherhood programs can have on family outcomes. The study focused on 3 different New Jersey facilities who run Inside Out Dad. And again, there was a control and intervention group. And the evaluators used pre- and post surveys, they used program graduate interviews, and they used staff interviews. And I do recommend that you read the entire report that is available in that free resource section of our website, since the details of their evaluation tools in particular can inform the work that you all are doing. So here are some of the results of the study. Inside Out Dad was shown to improve the father's attitudes on fathering. And they did note an increase of calls to children from dads in the intervention group. Very specific lessons remained from the curriculum with the dads throughout the course of the program as well. For instance, a father with 2 young daughters felt more comfortable with the subject of dating after the topic had been presented in the Inside Out Dad handbook and discussed during the group conversations. And coming from a dad of 2 daughters, I can also speak to how that topic can be a little daunting. But overall, the study did conclude that there were quantitative improvements in fathering self-efficacy, knowledge, attitude, and even contact with children. So again, that was something that Shanique had brought up in her portion, the importance of those visits and that family connection as it relates to that. Much of the father's success depends on their ability to connect with a similar program once they are out in the community. So this is the segue to the 24/7 Dad program that we offer and the post-release side of things. And this is really where the rubber hits the road. I mean, it's where he will face a number of new critical issues that he didn't necessarily have to face directly before release. Now, from the broader perspective, both of these programs, but especially 24/7 Dad, help in the development of these 5 protective factors, which many of you probably come across in your work, but they are parental resilience, social connections, knowledge of parenting and child development, and social and emotional competence of children. These factors are vital to broader healthy outcomes for families, the most significant of which is the reduction of risk for child abuse and maltreatment. National, state, and local efforts to prevent child abuse and maltreatment have increasingly been organized around these 5 factors, and I've seen this increase quite a bit over the last year or 2 in particular. Research has found that parenting competencies are vital to building those protective factors. So parental resilience, for example, involves the ability to manage and bounce back from challenges that emerge in every family's life, but especially in those families that are connected with a family member who is incarcerated. And it means finding ways to solve problems, building and sustaining trusting relationships, and knowing how to seek help. Key to building this resilience is addressing parents' individual developmental history and their capacity to empathize with others. And programs that rely on the attachment theory, such as Inside Out Dad and 24/7 Dad, help to create those pro-social connections necessary to develop that parental resilience. So that's kind of how that all ties in, to those specific protective factors. Let me touch on a specific 24/7 Dad study that highlights some of these dynamics. The evaluation here follows 4 cohorts, and I say follows because it's an ongoing evaluation, but it's following 4 cohorts of participants in the 24/7 Dad program. Following recruitment, fathers completed a baseline or a pre-program evaluation packet that included a consent form, a demographic survey, a survey of fathers' knowledge and skills, and a survey of fathering and co-parenting practices. Once they completed the packet, they were then assigned to either a treatment group or a control group, and that data was collected at the beginning and at the end of the program, along with a 6-week follow-up to measure the impact of the program on father behaviors over time. Even though that's a relatively short period of time, at least it's beyond the actual intervention. Fathers then completed a post-program packet. And again, I encourage you to just review that entire report because it highlights those specific instruments that they use to measure the outcomes. And those could be a great tool for you to be aware of, as you do your work as well. So the study found that by the end of the 24/7 Dad program, fathers in the intervention group were significantly more likely than fathers in the control group to be involved in tasks with their children, things such as reading, homework, and encouraging their child's talents. And this held true at their 6-week follow-up as well. Not only are there differences between the intervention and control group in terms of the involvement, particularly around tasks expected of contemporary fathers, but there were also differences in the rate of change in father involvement over time. So the study also showed an improved quality of relationship between the father and the mother as measured by improvements in co-parenting. So it went beyond just the father's own attitude and knowledge and some of his behavior, but it also had a direct impact on the relationship between the father and the mother, which is certainly huge when it comes to being a good dad. So here, let me just start out by saying I'm certainly not an expert on the evaluation side, and I'm basing some of these challenges on measuring outcomes on what I've heard from programs across the country. Fortunately, we have Dr. Fagan presenting on the webinar, so he can speak more to some things more specific to evaluation. However, it's no surprise that doing these kinds of studies I highlighted earlier does take a significant amount of funding to cover, for the cost of evaluators, additional staff time, other indirect costs. And even if you find a way to address the cost, there can be challenges gaining access to other family members, particularly if they don't live in the area, and then you'll have even then varying degrees of willingness to participate in the evaluation. Getting enough fathers to participate in the program can also be a challenge, especially on the post-release side where you don't have as much of a controlled environment. Here are the kinds of things other organizations have done to address those challenges. Some organizations have done a great job reaching out to their local colleges and universities. Oftentimes, department heads are looking for opportunities to present their master's or PhD level students that will give them experience that will help them succeed, as students and beyond. And I've seen a lot of programs get evaluations done this way with little or low additional expenses. And I would also make sure that whomever writes your grants understands the importance of measuring the impact on family outcomes as it relates to the fatherhood work. This will not only help you with future funding, but also contribute to the success of the larger fatherhood movement as well, as it contributes to, other studies in the field. And even if, in the worst case scenario, you're unable to get evaluators or evaluation funding, I always tell people to do what you can on your own. Our curriculum does come with pre- and post-assessment tools that don't take evaluation expertise. We do include assessment instruction sheets and worksheets that will provide impact results around attitudinal knowledge and behavioral change with the fathers that you work with. You can also use some of the other evaluations on 24/7 Dad and Inside Out Dad, if you do use these programs, as a proxy in some cases to share, the results. And we have received data as we look at the impact that these programs have had at the institutional or community level, particularly from some of the Department of Corrections around the country that use these programs and track the correlation between their fatherhood work and other outcomes, things like recidivism and disciplinary infractions in the facilities. The Indiana DOC reported a 23.83% prisoner return rate compared to an overall recidivism rate of 37.9%. We heard from the Nebraska DOC that they had only a 7.7% recidivism rate for men who went through their fatherhood program. And then the Kentucky DOC reported to us that men who participated in the Inside Out Dad programs have only a 16% recidivism rate versus 37% for the state. And they also reported an 86% reduction in disciplinary violations. So, when we see those kind of numbers and think about what that converts to with regard to family and community well-being and even safety, it is just staggering, really, to think about the impact that we could have. And then finally, here's the webpage for all the free resources, including those evaluation reports and impact videos I mentioned earlier. And additionally, there are free downloadable guides that can help you start or enhance father engagement work within your own organization. And there are some other tools you can use with moms and dads around responsible fatherhood. So with that, I'm going to pause. And Roneen, I don't know if you wanted to facilitate any questions or not, but I will defer to you on that.
All right. Thank you very much, Eric. So yeah, we'll take a little bit of time to see if anyone has any questions, and one did just come in. They're asking if, Eric, can you repeat the important information you said we should capture in the research and evaluation piece regarding measuring family outcomes?
I'm trying to remember exactly where that was. Let's see here. We should capture the research and evaluate something about measuring the family outcomes. Yeah, I'm trying to remember exactly.
So I'm not sure if this is specifically what this person was referencing, but you have there was the 5 protective factors around parental resilience, social connections, knowledge of parenting and child development, and social and emotional competence of children. So those 5 protective factors are one thing that might address this.
Yeah, I think that that would be the main thing that I could think of if that's what they were referring to. But yeah.
And I'll also put out there the PowerPoint. We'll mention this at the end as well, but the PowerPoint will be available to participants as well as a recording of this webinar. But please, if that wasn't quite the answer you were looking for, feel free to ask another question, and we can definitely address that. So another question, Erica, came in was around that Hawaii study that was done on 24/7 DAD. Just the randomized controlled trial, as you mentioned, conducting that kind of research requires a lot of resources and can be challenging. Are you aware of any specific challenges with using a randomized controlled trial in a mentoring reentry program, possibly around exposure to other programs or services for the control group, or if any other issues came up and how they address those?
Well, I mean, I know that there are always the the specifics around withholding certain kinds of services that you think could be beneficial to someone for the sake of doing a control is always something that I know they wrestle with. And but what they've done is, I think in that particular case, is they've gone back afterwards and offered some of those services, again, just at a later date after they've done some of the actual data gathering for them. So, that's one thing. I know another thing that has been challenging, as I mentioned, particularly on the post-release side, is, and when you're talking about control and intervention and then random assignment, is just getting enough participants in the pipeline in order to do that. And so, they have done things in terms of incentives for, for some of the fathers to participate. And sometimes it can be around child support arrearage forgiveness kind of incentives. Sometimes it can be, which is connected to, completing a certain percentage of the 12 sessions of the program. Sometimes they make sure that they have access to, sometimes gift cards for, gas cards or stuff like that to kind of help with the participation, particularly in the evaluation side of things. I had heard that they had used some of those kind of strategies as well. Those are a couple of things that just off the top of my head that I remember, mainly initially around the design, and then also around recruitment and retention of those fathers in the programs that will give them the sample size for, an effective evaluation.
All right, great, thank you. We did get a clarification on that earlier question that just came in. So they're wondering about when you were talking about doing an evaluation and making sure to look at the impact on family outcomes. And just do you have some suggestions on specific family outcomes that they should be monitoring when they're evaluating their programs?
Well, I know that certainly anything you can get at between the relationship between the dad and the child. And as I mentioned in there, they use things like, assisting with homework, and I think one of the other things was around the, encouraging the child around his or her talents. So that's the thing, is it sounds good to say, yeah, we're going to measure quality of relationship between dad and child, but then how you actually break that down into something tangible that you can measure, that's kind of taking it to that next step and looking for those kind of things that you can actually measure in terms of, like, how many hours a week does he read to the child, kind of before the intervention and after the intervention. And then with the mom, a lot of that was around co-parenting kinds of issues. And, there are different ways that you can get to that as well. And again, I'm not necessarily an evaluation expert, so I'm just kind of speaking from what I've heard from these evaluations, and when I look at their, the means of their design and the methodology of those evaluations, how they measured it and how they defined those relationships for purposes of, assessing it. But those are a couple of things that were related to those studies.
Great.
Well,
Thank
and
you
even on the pre-release side too, you can certainly measure, involvement with children in terms of, letters that are written, a number of calls that are placed, visits, and during the visitation, you can also build things in. So on the pre-release side, you can measure those kind of things.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Eric. I do want to mention that as you are working through your programs, we have some new Second Chance Act grantees on this webinar and some older ones. Your technical assistance provider from the National Reentry Resource Center will be talking to you about, among other things, program evaluation and partnering with your evaluators and what that can look like. And part of that conversation can and should be around what outcome indicators you're going to be looking at and what outcomes specifically you want to track for your program. So a lot of what Eric mentioned, these are great things to be paying attention to, but they might vary based on your program's target population, the particular facility you're working in, the community that you work in, and also your capacity and the capacity of your evaluation partner. So your TA providers will be available to you to have discussions around those issues. And we also do have a relationship with the National Fatherhood Initiative and the Fatherhood Research and Practice Network, so we could definitely bring them in to provide assistance with that as well. All right, so looks like we're good on the questions for this session. So we'll go ahead and pass it over to Dr. Jay Fagan from the Fatherhood Research and Practice Network, who graciously is going to be talking about, continuing on with some of what Eric was discussing, but talking about more around that performance measurement side of this issue. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to Dr. Fagan.
Yes, thank you, Ronin. I assume that everybody can hear me okay. And I've been asked to talk about measuring outcomes, particularly as it relates to families and family engagement. And so I'm going to do three things. One is that I'm going to talk about some ideas around selecting measures, and then I'm going to talk about one particular measure that we've been developing here at the Fatherhood Research and Practice Network, and that's a measure on co-parenting, but several other measures as well. And then the third topic has to do with collecting data collection. So in terms of selecting measures, and this may be some information that many of you are already aware of, so hopefully it's not too repetitious, but after determining appropriate outcomes for your program, which may come from your logic model or it may come from the grant proposal that was written, the next step is to consider some possible measurement tools. Now those could consist of either qualitative measures or quantitative measures. In terms of measuring impact, quantitative measures tend to be more useful in that regard. Now, we strongly recommend that programs consult with researchers about the selection of specific measures. Researchers have been trained to evaluate the quality of measurement tools and can answer some important questions that may not occur to programs that don't have a lot of experience with selection and use of outcome measures. So I should mention that the Fatherhood Research and Practice Network works with both researchers and programs to advance both the quantity and quality of evaluations in the fatherhood field. One of the things that we've heard from researchers periodically is that they would like to become connected to programs, but they don't know how to identify a program. And in fact, they have come to us to ask for recommendations. So I say that just to suggest that there are quite a few researchers out there in universities, but also in research institutes, who would like to do this kind of fatherhood applied research, but just don't have specific connections. And I would, in that light, suggest that you not be shy about reaching out to researchers. Now, In terms of selection of measures, a couple of things I think are very useful. One is that researchers have a sense of what the better validated measures are, and also what types of measures have been used in multiple studies. There's a lot of advantage of using measures that have been used in more than one study. It allows for comparison, and it also allows for some researchers to then pull those studies together and to actually do what's called the meta-analysis to determine impact of programs on fathers and families based on multiple studies. So researchers should select instruments, measurement instruments that have been tested already, preferably and actually importantly that have been tested with similar populations that the program evaluation is focusing on, and that the measure is going to line up closely and logically with the intended outcomes of the program and what the program is hoping to achieve and hoping to measure. So the following are some criteria to consider when selecting measures. Is the measure appropriate for the population of fathers being evaluated? For example, does the measure use words that are familiar to the population? I can't tell you how many times I've looked at a measure and questioned whether fathers in the types of programs that we're serving or that are involved in serving fathers, whether those men would actually be able to understand the questions, or whether the question uses some language that's familiar with the father, and oftentimes they do not. Measures should select items or use items that are clear and easy to answer and that do not have too many negatively worded items that can be very confusing for people to answer. Some other selection criteria: does the measure consist of a single item? Sometimes that is appropriate. So for instance, if you're asking about how much contact, how much face-to-face contact the father has with his children, that can easily be a single item. But oftentimes single item measures are not valid and are not likely to be sensitive enough to assess change in behavior or attitudes. On the other hand, measures that include too many items may lead to participant fatigue. And so you have to look for and seek measures where there is some balance on those in terms of length of the items. Does the measure have adequate variance? What that means is that there are some types of questions or questionnaires in which fathers are likely to give pretty much the same response to an item. For example, do all fathers respond strongly agree to a question? Just to give you an example here, we have found that when you ask fathers how important the role of being a father is to them, pretty much all fathers agree or strongly agree that the role of fatherhood is important. And so you find that there's not that much variation in the responses of fathers. You don't have many fathers, for example, who will say that the role of father is not important to them. Now, another challenge is that existing measures may be appropriate for some fathers in your program, but not for other fathers. For example, you may serve fathers whose children range in age from birth to young adulthood. Many of the existing fatherhood measures typically will ask questions that are really only relevant to fathers who have children of a particular age group, such as infancy or maybe middle childhood or adolescence. And it is appropriate to select measures of father involvement with children that have different versions of the measure. So there may be a version of the measure that applies to fathers who have infants, to fathers who have toddlers and preschool age children, fathers who have adolescents, et cetera. And in fact, the Fatherhood Research and Practice Network has just developed a set of father engagement measures We have a version of that measure for each age group, and the questions are different, and you couldn't ask questions of fathers who have adolescents to fathers who have infants. The behaviors are different and not applicable across developmental age. So it's very important to try to make sure that you're aware of the child's age and that the measures are appropriate for child developmental age. That measure, by the way, is being validated. We collected data on 650 fathers this past spring. 200 were in fatherhood programs, and the rest were in community settings that have very similar population of fathers. And so we validated that measure. It will be available on our website very shortly, so I would suggest that you look for, on our website, we have a measurement page where we actually include specific measures. And the website, by the way, is www.frpn.org. So we've also, based on that sample of 650 fathers that we just interviewed, we're also developing a new measure of co-parenting. Co-parenting meaning the extent to which mother and father or other adults work together with a father as part of a team. Generally speaking, there are two overarching aspects of co-parenting, one having to do with cooperation and the other having to do with conflict. So I'll say a little bit about how we developed this measure. This measure is also going to be available on our website in a couple of months. We're not quite ready to provide it publicly because it's in the process of being analyzed and validated. But just to give you an idea how we went about developing this measure, it was actually based on two studies that we did. First, we interviewed a sample of 71 fathers in focus groups, and all these fathers were in fatherhood programs, 9 different fatherhood programs. We asked them in-depth qualitative questions about the ways in which they and the child's mother engage in co-parenting, the challenges they experience in attempting to co-parent with a mother, and the ways in which they and the child's mother are able to co-parent successfully. We specifically asked the fathers about successful co-parenting because we found that when we asked them simply about co-parenting, they almost always told us about the negatives and rarely about some of the positives. And in fact, many of the fathers did have positive things to say about the way they and the mothers work together as co-parents. So I mentioned that this was based on a sample of 71 participants. A major co-parenting theme for the fathers, this is from the qualitative focus groups, was their perception that the mother undermines them as a father. Another major domain or content area that was presented by the fathers had to do with gatekeeping. Gatekeeping was a very common co-parenting theme mentioned by fathers. And the focus groups revealed two types of gatekeeping. One is that mothers would at times restrict their involvement, but at other times they were also facilitating, which is sometimes referred to as gate opening behavior, and that's the idea that they are actually encouraging the father and trying to provide additional opportunities for the father to spend time and be involved with his child. We also found that the fathers spoke a lot about this idea of having an alliance with the mother. Alliance is the sense that two people are working together as a cooperative team. For instance, this was one father named Eddie who said in one of the quotes, "There's got to be a team, there has to be a team, it has to be a team approach." This was in response to our question about how is it that you and the mother of your child work together as co-parents. We also found that many of the families have complex relationships, that oftentimes the fathers are co-parenting with more than one adult. Sometimes that may be more than one mother in cases of multi-partner fertility. And a number of fathers shared that they and the children's mothers have learned to work together. In some instances, they don't work very well together, and we had many quotes about that. But we also heard quotes about how the father would work together as part of a team in a cooperative way with several of his mothers. And for instance, this was a father named Amir who said, yeah, and it's crazy, now they both talk. Before they would not communicate, but nowadays I talk to one and she'll be like, yeah, I'll just talk to your other baby mama on Facebook. We talk to each other about the kids. We also found that fathers referred to their support of the mother and the mother being supportive of them. For instance, one father said, I always say because she's with him more than I'm with him, she knows more than I know about his situation. That's in reference to the child. So anything she really says, I've always got her back on it. And then most fathers reported fairly frequent conflict with the mother and their children. Now, just to synthesize some of this information about our co-parenting focus groups, our results show that co-parenting is a multidimensional construct that includes both negative and positive components. And these findings are very similar to co-parenting studies that have been done with other populations of parents. Although the co-parenting constructs or domains that we identified in this study, and those were things like gatekeeping and conflict support, et cetera, appear to be similar to those identified in other studies, we find that the parental behaviors in these co-parenting constructs are not always the same. Our findings showed that, for instance, undermining and gatekeeping domains include behaviors that appear to be unique for unmarried, non-residential fathers and mothers. For example, fathers indicated that some mothers try to keep the father's new partner from having any involvement with the child. And this is a type of gatekeeping behavior, but you're not likely to hear this about this type of behavior among co-residential parents. So in the development of our co-parenting measure, while the constructs are the same, we actually have behaviors in the instrument that are different than what you would find in other established measures that are also being used in a lot of the fatherhood studies currently. So that's why we felt it was important to develop a brand new measure. Another significant finding of the study is that co-parenting relationships between unmarried, non-residential mothers and fathers often involve another adult, other mothers, but often, sometimes relatives, and in particular, paternal relatives. So we have taken this qualitative focus group data, and we're using it to develop a co-parenting questions along each domain of co-parenting. We have developed our instrument and administered it to the 650 fathers that I spoke about a few minutes ago. Just to give you some of the sample items that we've included in our measure, the mother of my child tells me I'm doing a good job, or otherwise lets me know I'm being a good father. That would be a measure from the support domain. The mother of my child undermines me as a father. That's from the undermining domain. And the mother of my child makes it hard for me to spend time with my youngest child. That's from the gatekeeping domain. So I'm going to switch gears now and talk about interviewing, in particular interviewing family members as well as fathers. Now, of course, fathers should be interviewed, and this can include questionnaires, surveys about, for instance, their involvement with the child, their engagement in child-related activities, how much contact they have with children. That can be both face-to-face or social media contact. Also, how much responsibility they're assuming for the child in areas such as making decisions about children. And fathers should be administered co-parenting questionnaires. Their perception of the co-parenting relationship is very important. I heard some questions earlier about other types of measures. We think it's important, for instance, to assess fathers' sense of parenting self-esteem, which includes things like satisfaction with parenting and their sense of self-efficacy as a parent. We also think it's important to measure areas of involvement in employment, provision, payment of child support, and also, in addition to co-parenting, co-parenting is not the only important aspect of the mother-father relationships. There's also the question of what's the quality of the partner relationship, assuming that they are still in some type of romantic partnership or possibly married, et cetera. Now, one of the things that we've seen from years of research in this, with fathers and mothers in the types of populations that we're serving, is that there's often disagreement between mothers and fathers about many, many issues, including quality of the co-parenting relationship. So we suggest that if you have the ability to do this, if you have the resources, interview both mother and father. If you have even more resources and there are two mothers involved, it's even to greater benefit to try to interview both mothers as well as the father. Now, sometimes these interviews can be conducted over the telephone. That's the easiest and the best way to get to individuals that you may not have easy access to, and we think that's an effective way to gather survey data. So I mentioned earlier that no, co-parenting is not the only aspect of the mother-father relationship that should be assessed. There are aspects of conflict, support, communication, inter-partner violence that can be very important to measure that are outside of the co-parenting relationship. Just to say another word about this idea of interviewing both mother and father, because the question often comes up, and whose perception do you regard as most important? And in fact, both are important. Both the mother's perception and the father's perception of behaviors are important. Father may tell you, or in his assessment, he may perceive the co-parenting relationship as positive, but the mother may not. She may not see it as supportive, or she may not feel that she's undermining. So you may have an intervention with fathers or fathers and mothers that targets the co-parenting relationship, but if only the father perceives change, then that tells you something about how your intervention has worked. Perhaps it has only been effective in getting the father to change his perception, and there may need to be some thought given to how the intervention can then work in such a way that the mother perceives change too. I think that when both mother and father perceive change in pretty much in many areas of the work that we do, that it speaks to a greater extent to the effectiveness of the intervention. That extends also to father's engagement with children. If only the father perceives that he's more engaged with the child, but the mother doesn't, then that tells you something about the success of the intervention. So in terms of collecting data, most programs don't have too many challenges with collecting the pre-test data. That's often collected when the father starts the program. Oftentimes, fathers will be interviewed on the first session when they come for the program. Where it starts to become challenging is the collection of post-test or follow-up data. If there's been attrition, the fathers have dropped out and do not come to the last session, they may not be completing the post-test interview, and so the question becomes, how do you include that father in a post-test or a follow-up interview? Collecting post-test and follow-up interview is really critical if you're going to measure impact of the program. If you only have pre-test data, if half of the fathers have not completed the post-test, then it's very difficult to assess impact of the program. Now, what constitutes a successful post-test data collection? we find that on average about 65%, about 2/3 of data get collected at post-test, maybe a little bit less at, let's say, a 6-month or 1-year follow-up. But that 2/3 success rate at post-test seems to be pretty average, and you know, that's something for programs to strive for. Now, it may take more resources to collect that amount of data. Eric had said that there is a cost to doing this. If you are really serious about doing a good quality evaluation, then resources need to be put into collecting post-test and follow-up data. And generally speaking, that can be done by telephone if fathers don't show up for the last sessions, or possibly by email. We found some researchers are having some success with using Facebook to collect data because Facebook addresses oftentimes don't change, whereas telephone numbers, cell phones are often shut off. It's also very important to collect multiple telephone numbers. Get the father's mother's telephone number. She may be much more reachable than the father is, particularly if his phone is being cut off. So we suggest getting multiple phone numbers. And then it may take up to 10 to 15 telephone calls to reach that father. If you have an incentive, a small incentive, that helps also to collect that data. Calls should be made at different times of the day and on weekends and weekend days, evenings as well. If you have interviewers only making phone calls in the morning or the afternoon, that's not likely to result in a successful data collection. I mentioned getting multiple phone numbers and hiring staff and volunteers if you're serious about collecting data. Sometimes the cost of hiring volunteers can be fairly minimal, and so for several $1,000s, you can obtain that post-test data just by paying volunteers. It is important that interviewers have supervision for data collection. Once they're making those calls, they are going to have a lot of questions about what to do in different types of situations. We had one situation recently where we called the father at home, reached the mother, and the mother said to the interviewer, it was an undergraduate student who was making the calls, the mother said to the student that her son doesn't have a child. So of course you can't expect an undergraduate student to know how to deal with that situation, but it's very important that there be some appropriate supervision. If you're going to interview mothers, it takes more resources to do that. You're going to need to have some good scripts that explain to mothers why it's important that they participate. Mothers may not feel that it's of significance to participate, and so you need to be prepared as to what the interviewer is going to say to them. You should consider what other data you want from the mother. It's an opportunity. So, for instance, if you can get the mother on the phone in regular interviews, then that provides a great opportunity to obtain information about the child. The mother is likely to be able to be a good source of data collection about child, and it gives the program an opportunity to see if the program is having some impact on child development. And I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Thank you, Dr. Fagan. All right, so we're going to open it up to some questions. We do have some that have already been posted. So, Dr. Fagan, this is one of the questions, how did FRPN gain access to 650 fathers? You mentioned for one of the studies that there was that amount of fathers that were interviewed.
Right. Yeah, we recruited 200 from fatherhood programs that were very gracious in letting us come and recruit fathers there. It was a one-time interview, and we were paying fathers $30, gave them a gift card, so we had a lot of interest in participating. And then as far as the community sample, we went to grocery stores, barber shops, We went to churches. We went to recreation centers, Y's, you name it, we went there. And we collected data. And it turns out that that sample from the community, there is virtually no difference in any of our measures compared to those in the fatherhood programs. So it was a very similar sample demographically and on other measures as well.
Great, thank you. Another question, what has been the timeline for some of these studies that you've been describing? Were these able to be accomplished over the course of 1 or 2 years, or were they multi-year studies that took quite a bit of time to actually show results?
So I'm not sure if the caller is asking about for instance, an evaluation study that such as some of the ones that we're funding through the FRPN, or if they're talking about the measurement study. The 650 fathers that we collected data from, we collected that data starting in January 2015, and we finished in May. But we had a lot of students going out into the field and collecting data. As far as evaluation studies, it really depends. It depends on the population of the program. Some programs serve a very large number of fathers. There are some programs, at least in the responsible fatherhood field, that serve 300 and 400 fathers in a year. So we funded one project right now that's going to complete its data collection in a 1-year period of time. And at this point in time, they've collected about 190 pre-tests, and they're still collecting post-test and follow-up data. So it depends on the size of the program. Can take anywhere from 1 to 3 or 4 years, depending on how many fathers are being served.
Great, thank you. Another question is around interviewing the child to gather more information on outcomes for the child, obviously, and also for the family. I'd like to point out, a lot of the Second Chance Act fatherhood grantees are serving younger fathers whose children may be too young to interview. But generally speaking, what are your thoughts around interviewing the child and maybe the best ways to go about that, or if you found value there?
This is a real challenge in our field because the programs are serving fathers from infancy through age 18 and into young adulthood. If your program is serving primarily fathers with young children, then you can select measures that are specific to the child's development. So, for instance, there are separate measures for infants. There are separate measures for toddlers, and then as you get into middle child and adolescence, there are separate measures for those developmental periods as well. It's really important to make sure that the measure you use has been validated and developed for kids of a specific age group. So you cannot be asking certain types of questions. It would be ridiculous to ask questions that are relevant to adolescents to fathers who have very young children. If there's any way that administrative data are available, for instance, from schools, that's an excellent way to get child data. And by the way, this is a challenge that the field is grappling with right now, how to try to figure out whether our programs are having some impact on kids. And we know that at some point we have to be able to make that determination. I would say that if you can find a way to interview mothers in your study because you want to collect family-related information, and if you have select measures that are appropriate for different developmental stages, then you can administer those questionnaires to the mother. That then provides you with very, very good data, particularly about things like child behavior, maybe areas like social skills, social competence of children, or behavior problems of kids. So mothers become a very, very good source of data. It's challenging to interview fathers about children because sometimes they haven't seen their kids very much. And so if a father is seeing his child once every 2 months or once every month, then he may not be in a very good position to assess child behavior. And so he may try to answer questions, but the question is then how valid is that information? So I hope that answers your question. I'd be glad to maybe in a phone call, or feel free to get in touch with me if you want some specific ideas about measures.
Thank you so much. I'm really glad that you brought up the possibility of looking for this information from other sources, such as going to the schools. One thing that we can also assist with in our technical assistance is building partnerships with agencies that also are supporting youth that might also help grantees collect this information. So schools, child welfare agencies, child support agencies, other human service programs that are focusing on families. An important part of reentry work is connecting to these different systems that are supporting individuals returning from incarceration, and specifically for the younger grantees serving younger populations, these other agencies that are supporting youth outcomes. And in those partnerships where you're coordinating services, it might also be some good opportunity to gather information about the youth or the family members that are involved in this as well. One last question, Dr. Fagan. Most of your work focuses on fathers in general, but have you seen any trends, or have you come across any interesting patterns around what you see in data or outcomes specifically for fathers that were formerly incarcerated?
Data on fathers who were formerly incarcerated. In terms of program impacts, I'm not sure I'm totally following the question. Program impacts, or in terms of just the relationship between incarceration and child outcomes? Maybe
I think around the impact of the services being provided on probably on the father and the family.
Yeah. Well, as Eric Bacheri was saying, the NFI has done one of the only impact studies of a program on incarcerated fathers and families. So that's a good place to go to look at the impacts. There have been surprisingly few studies. There's lots and lots of information out there about, for instance, how incarceration affects families. But in terms of program evaluation and impact studies, we have a tremendous knowledge gap, and that's why there's so much of a need to do rigorous evaluations. We really do need to know what impact these programs have. And also, so for instance, the Rutgers University study that was done on Inside Out Dads, I believe that the follow-up was not a very long follow-up. We need to know to what extent these programs have an effect on fathers and families over a period of time. We just simply don't know the answers to some of those questions right now.
Great. Thank you very much. So just want to put out one last call. If anyone has any other questions, be sure you can put those into the panel at the bottom right-hand side of your WebEx screen. I will give one more minute to see if any other questions come in. In the meantime, I just want to thank Dr. Fagan, Eric, and Dr. Thomas for taking the time to present to us today on this topic. As I mentioned before, the Council of State Governments Justice Center is doing more to discuss family engagement as more grants are popping up that are focusing on those issues. Just so everyone is aware, on the call right now, we have adult mentoring grantees and young fatherhood mentoring grantees, but the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention just this year released 2 new grant programs with a focus on youth mentoring and families, the Latino-Latina Mentoring Grant, as well as the Children of Incarcerated Parents Grant that's focusing on incarcerated individuals in federal prisons and their families. So a lot more attention is being paid to family engagement and working with families of incarcerated individuals, and specifically working with fathers that are incarcerated and returning to the community is obviously getting a lot of attention, and we're doing what we can here to provide support to those programs. So it looks like we're good on the questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. Again, thank you to our presenters. I want to just mention again that we will email a link to the recording of this presentation as well as a link to a PDF of the PowerPoint slides used in the presentation in the coming weeks. These links will also be made available on the National Reentry Resource Center's website, which can be found at csgjusticecenter.org/NRRC. So I encourage you all to sign up for the newsletter that I mentioned earlier. That newsletter provides updates on additional webinars, other resources, news around reentry and behavioral health and mentoring, and gives updates on events such as the Second Chance Act Conference that's coming up in December, which is right around the corner. Thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to working with you throughout the rest of your grant programs. Thank you very much.